in the last 20 years, the number's been so high, and they've been from countries such as, Malaysia, the Philippines, China, and India. After COVID, you would notice that you were the only person speaking English on the train.
You're here to talk about Australian immigration, Australian politics. You're based in Australia. Can you give us an assessment of what Australia is like today in terms of immigration from third world countries and outside countries?
Well, Australia's had a fairly high immigration rate since 2000, early 2000s, since John Howard came in. But it has worked. It was around 100 and something thousand a year, which was pretty high, quite high. It was growing the population by about 1% every year for 20 years. So it was high. But just in the last few years, since Labor's Anthony Albanese came in, the numbers have exploded. We had 737,000 in 1 year alone, which is huge. And this has not really slowed down. They've said they were going to cap it, but they never really did. And so this has had enormous changes, enormous pressures added to Australia. So we've seen house prices skyrocket. Young people get locked out of housing basically forever. We've seen rents just become completely unaffordable. They're now usually 50% of people's incomes. We've seen rapid demographic change, especially in our cities. People are sort of, to quote a politician, feeling like strangers in their own country. A Liberal MP, Australian Liberal MP, actually said that recently. So it's having an enormous effect, and now people are starting to sort of ask questions. Usually Australians are quite apathetic politically. There was never really that much pushback or that many questions asked. We were very welcoming. But the pressures are so bad now that, people are getting very, very angry.
You talk about the strangers comment. That's actually a very similar comment to Keir Starmer and what he gave a speech a few months ago, and then he kind of reversed on that speech. Can you tell us about what it's like living in Australia over the last couple of decades? How you've seen Brisbane, I know you're based in Brisbane, how you've seen Brisbane changed, other cities changed because of immigration?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'm from Brisbane originally, and Brisbane and Queensland, have a lower foreign-born percentage. We don't get as many migrants as the big cities like Sydney and Melbourne, but I actually lived in Sydney for like the last 4 or 5 years, and that's where I saw enormous demographic differences. Lots of suburbs are majority foreign-born, and that's a fairly recent thing as well. And the thing about immigration, Australia's immigration rate and system is that it didn't just change in number. So it didn't just, obviously go from 100,000 to 500,000. It also changed in the type of migrants. So for a long time in the 20th century, we had Greeks, Italians, people from Europe, people from Vietnam as well. And this largely, worked pretty well. People sort of assimilated and integrated. In the last 20 years, the number's been so high, and they've been from countries such as, Malaysia, the Philippines, China, and India, and they've all been moving into various sort of suburbs around Sydney and around Melbourne, and this is really, really demographically changed things. And parts of Sydney where I lived, it was there were you would after COVID you would notice that you were the only person speaking English on the train and things like that. So it had this sort of noticeable effect. So I think when that Liberal MP said what Keir Starmer said, that people are starting to feel like strangers in their own country, I think that really struck a chord. I think people they couldn't quite verbalise why things felt different, but that sort of hit the nail on the head.
So culturally, Australia is changing because of immigration through people's languages and things like that. Obviously, historically, Australia has had a lot of British immigration, and I'm not talking about in the early days. I mean, like in the last few decades, it's a very popular place for Brits to move. Is that controversial in Australia? Like, is it British immigration that's worrying people, or is it the immigration coming from India, Malaysia, and other places?
We have a huge problem with Brits coming here and causing. No, they're fantastic. No, nobody really notices. Brits I think, the last forever have been the predominant migrant group. That's only just recently changed. Now it's people from India who are the biggest migrant group to come in. And so, no, there's never really, we've never really noticed, British immigration. It's really it's really changed in the last couple of years, and people are noticing.
And why has it changed so much? And is this just because of this new Labour Prime Minister, or are the Liberals to blame as well?
The Liberals definitely deserve blame. I mean, they were effectively the ones that started and continued this. And they also sort of changed the immigration system. So to their credit, the Liberals did stop the boats. So we no longer have a sort of a illegal migrant boat problem. They actually did a really effective job in stopping that. So we basically have no illegal immigration problem. What the Liberals did do, is they effectively legalized it. And so what we saw was that it went from illegal migrants arriving by boats and things like that to actually coming in through sort of dodgy student visa processes and colleges and things like that. And so where we are now is that we have around 800,000 international students in the country. So this is about 1 in every 30 people in Australia is an international student. So they've effectively just legalized illegal immigration. So this is which is it makes things much harder to deal with as well. If you have like an illegal immigration problem, then you can start talking about deportations and things like that, like they are in America. But we can't, we don't really have those processes here legally. So it's a really difficult position for Australia.
But coming back to why, can you talk more about the recent Labour government? Is it like, oh, we need people for jobs, we need to make Australia more diverse? What is it?
Yeah, the Labor government is saying that we have a skills shortage. There was a skills summit just after COVID where businesses were crying out for workers and saying that we need workers. I mean, the real reason is that wages were just becoming too high for Australians, and so this was hitting big businesses' bottom line, and so there was this massive cry out for immigration, and that's really what happened. There was enormous pressure from Treasury to bring people in because they see them as a way to grow the economy. And there's enormous pressure from businesses and universities calling for workers and staff and consumers and international students. I mean, it's a huge business, the university sector in Australia, to bring in international students. So that's the major reason why, or at least like the reason they tell us. We're also getting fed lines about diversity as our strength and stuff like that still, but that's the reason they're telling us.
So in Britain and in America and many Western European countries, there has been a huge backlash against mass migration. Are you seeing the same thing in Australia?
Up until about 4 months ago, no. So there was really no talk about it at all. It was, like I said, Australians are pretty relaxed about immigration, relaxed about politics. And then in the end of August this year, there was these huge rallies across Australia, not just in capital cities, but in smaller cities and towns right across Australia. And they were effectively calling for the end of mass immigration. This is unseen in Australia. I don't think we've ever had anything like this. And it surprised a lot of people in the media class and the political class. They realised they have a serious problem on their hands. So it's kind of exploded. And since then, immigration politics really has changed. The Overton window really has shifted. And now there's a lot of people talking about what do we do about this? How do we fix immigration? Things like that. It really emboldened a lot of politicians and media figures to come out strong on immigration.
So the Liberal Party, which is your equivalent of the Conservatives in the UK, how conservative are they? As I said, in the UK, the Conservatives have come under a lot of criticism for not being, conservative enough, particularly on immigration and other issues. Is it similar in Australia?
Absolutely. I mean, the similarities are like 1-to-1 almost. I mean, there's probably about 5 good Conservatives in the Liberal Party at the moment. I mean, they're effectively a left-wing party in many instances. This is starting to change, though. I mean, similar to the Tories in the UK, there is this faction sort of emerging, this kind of national conservative or Australia First faction emerging in the Liberal Party. With people actually starting to call out immigration, and not just call out immigration, but also talk about demographic change, talk about the migrant voting patterns and stuff like that. So there is this kind of vibe shift happening in the Liberal Party. Whether it's enough to actually save them, because they're doing terribly in the polls right now, whether it's enough to save them, time will tell. But there are at least people in there trying to sort of fix things and save the party.
Why are they doing so bad in the polls?
Just because they are really bad on immigration, or have been really bad on immigration. They're really just not connected to the Australian people anymore. They're still, up until recently, they were pro net zero, and power bills have been going through the roof for most Australians. They've been sort of basically pro-immigration up until recently. So they've really just like not been effective. They've not been a good opposition to the Labor Party. The Labor Party is still doing very strongly in the polls despite cost of living crisis, a housing crisis. So they've not been an effective opposition. And what we've seen is our sort of populist party, One Nation, go gangbusters in the polls. In many places, in many seats, they're starting to flip the Liberal Party, which is unheard of. I don't think that's really happened, at least in 20 years. So similar to Reform, there's quite a sort of backlash against the Liberal Party towards One Nation.
Tell us about One Nation then, because I know that in New Zealand, they have a very strong populist party that has done very well. But this One Nation party in Australia has struggled maybe in the last few decades to gain the same kind of traction as, say, Nigel Farage in Britain or other populists in Western Europe.
Yeah, I think part of that, I believe, comes down to Australia's voting system. I mean, New Zealand has a different, I think they may have proportional representation. I think it makes it easier for New Zealand First to get into government. So it's a bit harder for One Nation. They also have a bit of, they've been attacked by the media for 20 years straight. So they have and that's done a lot of damage to their brand. They've also had sort of like all sort of populist right parties, they've had internal troubles as well. But I will say, just in the last couple of years, they've really made an attempt to reform. I think they've seen the opportunity, and they're starting branches. They're really professionalising out as a party, and they can really they can be a major risk to the Liberal Party come the next election. So I think the Liberal Party, like I said, the Australian First faction and the Liberal Party are realising this. They may get flipped. They're seeing what's happening in the UK with reform. And there's a bit of an arms race going on now between One Nation and the right and the Liberal Party.
In terms of the demographic changes in Australia, will Australia be a minority Australian country in the next coming decades? In Britain, there's some studies that suggest it'll be early as 2050s that the native British population will be a minority in our country for the first time ever. Is the same thing predicted to happen in Australia?
The unfortunate thing is that Australia is really bad, possibly on purpose, about collecting, ethnic demographic data and things like that. But what I will say is that we have one of the highest foreign-born percentages out of the entire world. So Australia has around 32% foreign-born population. In the cities, it's like racing towards 50%. So on that metric alone, yeah, we are racing towards being like almost a majority foreign-born country. Our birth rate is plummeting. It's in absolute decline, while we still have extremely high immigration. So it only naturally follows that you can see it becoming majority foreign-born by this century effectively. And the ABS put out a post recently, sort of saying majority of Australia is migrant, in that it's either foreign-born or the children of foreign-born people. So this is an enormous demographic change, and people are starting to realise this. It's extremely noticeable in Sydney and Melbourne, where house prices are extremely high. Towns and cities are changing. So and people are also, because of the cost of living pressures and the living standards in these cities, people are fleeing these cities en masse as well, and effectively getting replaced by migrants.
There was some recent opinion polling suggesting that young people in Australia heavily support the left parties, and it's a very small minority who are supporting the right. Again, similarity with Britain, where it depends on the opinion poll that you're looking at, but it looks like the Conservatives and Reform are not doing very well at all with young people. Whereas in America and France and other European countries, actually a lot of young people support Conservative parties. Look at somewhere like Poland, where the furthest right party is actually the most popular among young people. So what's going on in Australia? Is it the case that young people are supporting the left generally, and it's the older people on the right?
Yes and no, though I will say it sort of splits between males and females. I think males are increasingly turning right. I think the major problem for Australia and possibly for the UK, I'm not too sure, is that the right has really struggled and the populist right has really struggled to appeal to young people. It's usually been seen as this kind of reactionary, almost boomer sort of movement. But yeah, so there hasn't really been this kind of, youth vibe shift that we've seen in France and Sweden and other countries yet. But I think that is changing. I think that is changing. Young people are sort of shifting right, at least sort of in conversations that I'm having. Whether that plays out in polls, I'm not too sure. But I will say as well, I mean, Labor have done a fantastic job at sort of keeping all of these groups and electorates on their side, sort of thing. The Labor Party is still seen as being for the worker for a lot of these groups, and it's still sort of the fashionable party to vote for. I can't see that surviving very long if the cost of living and housing crisis keeps getting worse. But yeah, again, it comes down to the right making a stronger pitch to young people. So we'll see if that happens.
Tell us about Pauline Hanson. This is the leader of the Populist Party in Australia.
Pauline Hanson's been in Australian politics since the 90s. She started One Nation and has been sort of in and out of Parliament. She's now a senator with Malcolm Roberts and a couple of other new senators. And she's been very consistently against immigration. Just recently, she's been very strong on its effects on housing and cost of living. But yeah, it was always kind of hovering around sort of the 5% mark in terms of votes and whatnot. But that again is changing. You're now seeing polls where she's hitting 12%, things like that. And she's also sort of getting a lot of recognition. She was just in Mar-a-Lago recently while Donald Trump was there. There is this sort of momentum behind One Nation. Whether they can capitalize it, whether she can capitalize on it, we'll see come 2028. They have this unfortunate habit of sort of having a really good run in the polls and then sort of tripping and stumbling and not really getting the lower house seats that we need to actually, take government or things like that. But yeah.
What about the cultural debates in Australia around people like Captain Cook? Again, I know I keep comparing Australia to other countries, so I apologise. But, obviously in Britain, America and other places, we've seen a huge backlash against so-called colonial figures and our evil colonial past, slavery and so on. Are you having those same debates in Australia? I suppose you are. Is Australia becoming so-called woke?
I think Australia is, like, at least in a media sense and our elite, sort of cultural elite, it's a very woke country. Like it really is. And that isn't helped by the fact that, like I said and keep saying, we do have a fairly apathetic sort of, so we don't have this assertiveness that the Americans have about their history and their heritage. And there's, I'm also seeing online, there's a similar sort of pushback in the UK and Britain. But I will say that it does feel like, 2026 and 2025, especially after, the protests and rallies that we had, that is starting to change. I think we are starting to fall in behind America and Britain in this sort of pushback. Everybody's a bit sick of it. Everybody's living standard is getting way worse. And they're like, why are we talking about, toppling statues and burning flags when, when I can't afford, to buy a home, things like that. So I think, there will be this pushback and this defense of things like Australia Day. The left wants to change the day because they think it's offensive. And we've got Australia Day coming up in early January. So that's going to be another sort of interesting metric about whether this is on the back foot and Australians are getting sick of this sort of woke sort of, revising history, and whether Australians actually want to take their country back.
Well, it depends who you think Australians are. I suppose some on the left may argue that the Aboriginal people, they're the true Australians, and you are an invader, a colonizer, and so on. And Australia Day is very offensive to those Aboriginals whose land was conquered. How do you respond to that? And what do you make of the kind of Aboriginal aspect in Australian politics? Can you talk about how that works?
Yeah, I mean, it's often been used as a sort of wedge against mainstream Australia and heritage Australia that, we came here as conquerors and colonists, and so we should all feel bad about it. I think any sort of merit to that argument, like I said, is kind of being lost in the fact that living standards are getting worse and things like that. I think as well, it's kind of they're kind of overplayed their hand, the left, in this regard by pushing this, because it's forcing a lot of people to say and evaluate the institutions and all the good things actually that colonialism and whatnot brought to Australia. And I think they're actually assessing it and evaluating all these things, and they're like, actually, this is an amazing country. The fact that we came to Australia and built these wonderful cities and built this like incredible civilization at the edge of the earth is actually something to be immensely proud of. And people wouldn't have even considered our heritage and historical background if it wasn't for the left and the media constantly attacking our heritage. And so, it's kind of working against the left now. It's kind of creating this national consciousness, and instead of feeling guilty and feeling ashamed, people are like, actually, I'm extremely proud to be Australian. This is an amazing country, and we have an incredible sort of British heritage as well, but also our own unique identity too. So yeah, again, like I said, 2026 Australia Day, I think, will be a very interesting marker for the mood of the nation about that issue.
Well, there was actually a vote on this issue which had a positive outcome recently. Tell us about that and why you think that's so significant on the Aboriginal question.
Yeah, that's right. We had a sort of a referendum on the voice to Parliament. Labor, Anthony Albanese and Labor wanted this sort of extra branch of government that had Indigenous and Aboriginal representation in our government. It was effectively putting race into the Constitution. There's like a similar scenario in New Zealand, which is extremely controversial over there. And I think that was, that eventually got voted down around 60 to 40%. Like, it was a decent margin, and even in sort of more left-leaning states like Victoria as well. And that was a real marker that actually people were no longer interested in sort of pursuing this left-leaning progressive vision. That was one of the first times I've actually seen Australia assert its own pride and national identity, and actually say, actually, we're not going along with this anymore. This is too far. So it was an interesting sort of canary in the coal mine of what's to come. And so the momentum from that is sort of building.
So you've said throughout this interview, Australians have historically been apathetic towards politics and immigration. Why? I mean, why aren't Australians more angry about this stuff or energized? Have you lost your Captain Cook spirit?
I unfortunately think, to an extent, yes. I think, especially highly urbanized cities in like Melbourne and Sydney, you really just get removed from the frontier sort of spirit and harshness of Australia, and you just get get too used to the good life. I mean, the sun is shining. Or at least until recently, we were a fairly wealthy country with high living standards. So there was no real reason to. But now that's sort of changing. Things are getting harder, and it's pushing people into asking serious questions. My generation, they can't afford a home, and so it's sort of, they start asking why this is, and they work back and they realize actually this entire country and political system is kind of working against us. So there's still a lot of strong national pride in the suburbs and the regions and rural Australia. We just have to, take back the cities and remind Australians living in the cities that, actually Australia isn't that bad a place. It's something to be very proud of.
All we hear about is how dangerous Australia is, with all the animals and the spiders and whatever, and the sun and the deserts. So I guess you've managed to solve most of those problems.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're an extremely urbanized city. Like, Sydney is like 5 million people, Melbourne's like 5 million people. So those are the sizes of like, Denmark or something. So you were extremely removed from the elements there. You have very sort of comfortable life there, and I suppose it does have a softening effect. But like I said, that apathy is melting away.
Okay, well, Jordan, I expect you to go and beat up some kangaroos after this and retain that spirit. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Appreciate it.